Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Cancer Care Innovation, the Multi-Cancer Early Detection Test Leaders are Implementing for Detection Sooner. On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, I'm Assistant Editor Giles Bruce. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'm going to walk through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. And if at any time you don't see your slides moving or have trouble with the audio, please try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. We are here to help. With that, I'm pleased to welcome today's speakers. We have Joe McKenna, Vice President of Enterprise Partnerships for GRAIL, Dr. Whitney Jones, Senior Medical Director at GRAIL, Anwell Wilbekin, Senior Director of National Accounts for GRAIL, and Dawn Cardero, Director of Precision Medicine at Point 32 Health. Dawn, Joe, Whitney, and Anwell, thank you for being here today. I'll now turn the floor over to Joe to kick us off.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for making time this morning or this afternoon, depending on where in the country you may be sitting. Thrilled to be with you today. Wanted to start just with our mission at GRAIL, which is simply to detect cancer early when it can be cured. In terms of our company and organizational background, we were founded in January of 2016 to take on one of the world's biggest challenges, which is the current cancer epidemic. We are headquartered in Silicon Valley, which is really the intersection of life sciences and technology industry. We have a world-class team of leaders, scientists, clinicians, engineers, and other experts upon which our technology relies. We were acquired by Illumina in August of 2021 for roughly $10 billion in consideration. And we are on track to grow to over 1,200 employees across 2023. We and our product, Galleri, which is our multi-cancer early detection test, is built on a tremendous scientific foundation. To date, we have conducted multiple studies with over 335,000 participants around the world, and we released the Galleri test into the marketplace in June of 2021. Since our inception and our ongoing work involves a myriad of clinical partnerships. You can see some of our closest partners there on the right-hand side of your slide. Again, these are both clinical study as well as, in some cases, commercial partner organizations. So in terms of our foundational goal, which is detect cancer early when it can be cured, it's all about improving the survival and mortality associated with cancer diagnosis and the resulting journey. Most simply, when we find cancer early, 89% of the time, we can achieve a 5-year or greater survival rate. Conversely, when cancer is found and diagnosed late, we do far worse in terms of that survival rate, just over 20%. I'll now pass it to Dr. Whitney Jones, my close colleague and Senior Medical Director here at GRAIL, for a little bit more on the science and the technology behind Galleri. Dr. Jones?
Yeah, thank you very much. Great to be with you guys today, again, wherever you are. And again, I want to start off by saying how critical it is to begin to disseminate this information and how much GRAIL values the importance of evidence-based medical approaches. And again, as Joe suggested, we have over 335,000 participants in clinical trials as we speak. And a couple of these to note, the CCGA had almost 15,000 people, and that's what we utilize to not only understand the best modality of which to assess for cell-free DNA, but also to train our classifiers and subsequently validate these. And that led to the market emergence of the Galleri test a little over a year and a half ago. The Pathfinder study, also in the foundational study, was a return of results study to over 6,600 participants in various institutions across the country. And that helped us assess the diagnostic testing required to achieve a diagnostic resolution, to better evaluate the test performance, and to assess participant reported results such as anxiety or other concerns. We've completed enrollment in these 3 trials: Summit, which is for evaluating people at high risk for lung cancer and lung cancer screening clinics in the UK. Also, the National Health Service trial with over 140,000 people involved in 2 arms, assessing the clinical utility for a population screening at risk in the UK. And finally, the STRIVE study, which was performed in people undergoing mammography screening. We are currently enrolling for Pathfinder 2, which is going to be a 20,000 person study based in the United States, again, evaluating for clinical utility and safety, to be augmented and extremely enriched with disparate populations, as well as those at high risk. Because one of our focuses here is, of course, making sure that this test over time closes gaps and disparities and understanding our performance in those populations. So Galleri is a really a new type of test. The capacity to evaluate multiple cancers simultaneously is really new to the cancer screening world, where we'd been focused on single cancer screenings with high sensitivity. And again, the important issue I want to focus on is that we detect a common biological cancer signal that allows us to detect so many different types of cancers, as you can see on the right. And then once that cancer signal is identified, then we utilize the methylation patterns that are intrinsic in tissue development to accurately identify where, in fact, those cancers are coming from. And so we only screen for 5 cancers right now at USPST levels, if you include prostate cancer. So the vast majority of these cancers have no broad societal guideline recommendations. And so we came out of non-invasive prenatal testing for pregnant women to see if there were fetal abnormalities, and about 10 of 125,000 specimens in these pregnant women had extremely abnormal signals. The scientists were concerned about cancer, and in fact, each of these 10 women were diagnosed with cancer after they delivered their children. All the children were delivered normally, and that was the aha moment. So we do know that not only cancer cells, but all cells in your body shed small cell-free DNA fragments in the bloodstream. These are about 100 to 150 base pairs long. And so they're not full chromosomes. They're not metastatic tumor cells. They're small fragments, and they have a half-life of about 30 minutes in your blood. So they're truly a snapshot. When we draw the specimen, then we looked at the blood sample within the plasma isolate to look for these. And initially, we weren't sure if we should be looking at somatic mutations or fragmentomics, but methylation was quite new back in 2016. But in a head-to-head comparison trial, it turned out that methylation, particularly bisulfite methylated targeting, was far outperformed the other modalities. And so when this test comes back, it comes back really as a binary test. The vast majority of people, about 99%, will receive a no cancer signal detected result. That's good news. It needs to continue on with multi-cancer screening in terms of USPSTF. Are they up to date with colonoscopy, colon cancer screening, lung cancer screening, et cetera? It's great news. It has a negative predictive value of about 98.5%, which has a great value in and of itself. About 1% are going to have a cancer signal detected that requires additional diagnostic workup, again, directed by our cancer signal origin accuracy of 88%, which helps make the workup more efficient in guiding those folks in to confirm the evaluation of cancer. And so it's a very elegant pathway designed to really be delivered at the primary care level to a broad group of people. And in terms of, again, we develop and have a common biological cancer shared signal. So we're not developing 50 different classifiers, one for each tumor. It's that common shared signal that allows us to expand cancer screening beyond USPSTF into those with no recommended options. And so we perform particularly well in more aggressive cancers where there's increased biological shedding of cell-free DNA. and many of those have absolutely no cancer screening options. We've done this with an extremely high specificity of 99.5%. So that's going to be 5 false positive tests out of 1,000 tests ordered. And because of our extremely high specificity, we have a very elevated positive predictive value, particularly when you compare this to other types of screenings that we use in clinical practice today. Mammography has a PPV of 4.4%. Cervical cancer screening, 1%. Colorectal, based on stool testing, 3.7 and 8.7% for Cologuard and FIT respectively, and low dose CTs about 6%. So again, these are all based on high sensitivity with lower specificity, and our very high specificity allows us to obtain these extremely high positive predictive values and negative predictive values. And so again, the most important way to think about this is we're expanding the concept of early detection to those 70% of cancers that currently have no cancer screening covered. And the concept is to identify and intercept these cancers at earlier parts of their cancer trajectory in the early stages when they're more easily treated with both conventional surgery as well as adjuvant therapy as needed. Most of these cancers on this screen here have 0 screening identified. And I would also add for lung cancer screening, we have less than 10% compliance. And then people who do one lung cancer screening very seldom follow through with a regular programmatic piece. So we have a lot of unscreened cancers out there. And so if we just look at this at early detection levels in stage 1 and 2, you can see in the lighter stage of purple here, these all have 33% and above sensitivity. So for stomach, lung, lymphomas, esophagus, over 50% sensitivity in stage 1 and 2 for anus, sarcoma, ovarian and pancreatic cancers, colon and rectum cancers, as well as cervical cancers, head and neck cancers. And when you get to the darkest purple, plasma cell neoplasms, as well as liver and cholangiocarcinomas, all have greater than 75% sensitivity for stage 1 and stage 2 disease. So really unparalleled. But the greater concept is instead of just looking for single cancers at points in time, we're really looking for the entire cancer universe, with the exception of brain cancers, which the cell-free DNA does not cross the blood-brain barrier. And so a real paradigm shift in cancer detection. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anwel Wilbelkin, who's going to talk to us about what the payer test looks like, what the Galleri test, looks like in the payer space. Anwel?
Thank you, Whitney. And I'm excited to share some examples of current payers. And of course, we have Don here to go a little bit more in detail. And when I think of payers, I think of population-based decision makers, right? Not just the individual, but the overall population. So when we think about the total cost of cancer, we know that it's increasing over time. More and more individuals are being diagnosed with cancers and they're being treated successfully. But when we look at early stage cancer versus late stage cancer, in this example, looking at Medicare beneficiaries, individual diagnosed with early stage cancer versus late stage cancer has up to 7 times higher costs associated with late stage cancer for a Medicare beneficiary. And then if we look at the other side, all of the wonderful new treatments that have come to the market to treat cancer, from 2008 to 2020, 77% have been late stage oncology products in the war on cancer, in that pipeline of products. And that's great news, but if we can find cancer earlier, maybe we can treat those patients and have a better chance at success. Joe mentioned the 89% survival rate when cancer is found in early stage versus 21% when it's found at late stage. So if we're able to move more cancers from late stage to early stage, well, what's the economic savings? One estimate is that $26 billion could be saved if we just simply move from a late stage cancer diagnosis to early stage cancer diagnosis. Now, as you've heard from Joe and Whitney, the Gallery test has the potential to shift cancer detection from late stage to early stage. And you see the standard of care in the light blue. So these are the anticipated cancers we would find if we were looking at diagnosis per 15,000 individuals. With our standard of care screenings, those that are recommended today, we would expect to find the majority in stage 4. But you can see if we were to add the addition of Gallery multi-cancer early detection, we would find additional cancers, and more of those would be found at stage 1 and stage 2. Because with the Gallery test, you're probably finding cancers in individuals who are asymptomatic. They have no signs or symptoms because it is a screening test. So if we're able to shift cancers earlier, we should be able to treat them at a lower cost. Resection, simple chemo or radiation therapy should be more effective. And we know that we will have greater survival benefits for those patients as well. So if you're a payer and you're thinking, wow, I have this Gallery test, it can do great things, but where do I start? And this is just 2 examples, but where we think you should start in our intended use is individuals that are 50 and older, because once you hit age 50, you have a 13 times greater chance of developing cancer in your lifetime. And then there are other examples. We are currently deploying the Gallery test directly with employers, with commercial customers, and sometimes employers and customers decide that they want to go down to a lower age. Here's an example of an employer that decided to go 40 to 49 with certain additional risk factors. So whether that is, if you're looking at your smoking population, individuals that are cancer survivors, individuals that are current smokers or they have a smoking history, BMI, immunocompromised individuals, there are additional risk factors that one could look at when trying to determine who's the best population to start utilizing the Gallery test with. And there are additional factors that can increase the risk of cancer. As I mentioned, age 50 plus is the #1 risk factor. As you can imagine, tobacco smoking, hereditary cancer, excess body weight, etc. And you can see some of the others that are listed here, but let's go into a little bit more detail on 2 potential areas where one could start. So if we're just looking at hereditary and familiar cancer, we can see it represents anywhere between 10 to 15% for hereditary and 5 to 15% for familial of the 1.9 million cancer diagnoses expected in a year. And when we think about that, well, look at some of these cancers that are often associated with hereditary and familiar cancers: ovarian, pancreatic, liver, thyroid, kidney, gastric, gallbladder, etc. You know what these cancers have in common? There is no USPSTF recommended screening tests available. So for these individuals, they are literally waiting for signs or symptoms, and that's the only way they're going to be diagnosed that they have this cancer. Well, now with the Gallery test, there is an option, a multi-cancer screening test that can find these cancers. So just something to think about. And when we talk with payers, we always want to bring that funnel down to a smaller size that we can start with. And here's just an example. Maybe we want to do a pilot with early stage detection for people with hereditary and increased familial risk. We know there are more individuals out there that are getting genetic tests done for predisposition or family history. That could be a very good place to start in trying to evaluate and understand Gallery in a payer population. The second area is tobacco smoking. We all know that lung cancer is 25 times greater in those individuals that smoke than non-smokers. But oftentimes, smoking can cause many other types of cancers as well, and they're all listed here on the right. And then you can see the map on the left just simply indicates the degree of smokers by individual state. And with 12% of the US population as current smokers, and we know they have an increased risk of developing cancer, another pilot example could be those individuals at the elevated highest risk of cancer due to their smoking history. And if you wanted to add smoking history plus hereditary and familiar cancers, you even have a more enriched population that has an increased risk of developing cancer. So just another example to think about. Now, as I mentioned earlier, age is the #1 risk factor for developing cancer. And so when we see that age 50, that's kind of our intended use population. But 65 is highlighted here because that's our Medicare Advantage, Medicare beneficiary age of 65 here in the United States. So that risk of developing cancer goes up even higher. And what we've done at GRAIL, we just did a refresh of market research, and this data just was published or made available March of this year. And it was based on 1,000 Medicare beneficiaries that are current or aging in. And we looked at, from a supplemental benefit, how would the Galleri test rate? And you can see of relative importance, it was third, right behind vision and dental benefits. Now, what we don't know is why, but one hypothesis is, as I mentioned in that earlier slide, age 65, you had a greater chance of developing cancer, and you probably have more family and friends that had to deal with cancer, and it may be of higher importance to those individuals. But you can see some of the other benefits listed there: over-the-counter card, caregiver support, telemedicine, but the Galleri test rated very high among this research study of 1,000 beneficiaries. And moving on, most respondents believe that Galleri would increase their plan satisfaction for current beneficiaries and then retention for those that may be looking to re-enroll. So of those that strongly and somewhat agree, you can see that 65% would be more satisfied with their Medicare health insurance company. We don't know how this will play out in terms of overall satisfaction with the plan, but at least with the Galleri test, it was very positive. And then the second one was 60% strongly and somewhat agree that if my Medicare health insurance company offered Galleri, I would be more likely to re-enroll. And then one other aspect that we looked at as well in the research is, well, what's the impact of copays on individuals within a Medicare Advantage population, looking at Galleri as a supplemental benefit? And you can see in the pink, extremely or very interested was very high when there was no copay. And then if you were to go all the way up to $150 copay, that level of extremely or very interested drops down to 6%. So it seems to be that if a copay is involved, that $50 or less would probably be the right target, where you would still have a fair amount of interest or fairly interest of individuals to utilize the Galleri test. And we have a lot more detailed market research that we can share. If you would like to engage, there'll be some directions on how to do that towards the end. So this is a slide that I'm very proud of. Whitney mentioned the National Health Service and what we're doing with the UK, but these other 3 customers are current payers that we are partnering with at GRAIL. And one I want to mention is Fountain Health. They are a commercial provider, and they provide the Galleri test to every member as part of an annual wellness benefit. And that's their model on how they're deploying in the marketplace. I was just speaking to Medicare Advantage. We have Alignment Healthcare, and they are offering the Galleri test as a supplemental benefit to their members. And lastly is Point 32 Health. And I like the quote here from Kane Hayes, their president and CEO, and I'm just going to read the last part. Galleri has the potential to be a game-changing screening tool that could be life-saving for people in the early detection of cancer. And everything that GRAIL is about is detecting cancer early when it can be cured. And when we think about populations, we're thinking about thousands of people. But at the end of the day, we all want to be able to impact one individual, one family, and have an impact on their life. And on that note, I'm very pleased and honored to pass it over to Don, who's been a great partner to work with as we move down this partnership with Point 32 Health.
Great.
Don?
Thank you, Anwel. It is a pleasure to be here. And as mentioned, I am the Director of Precision Medicine at Point 32 Health. My background is as a genetic counselor, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk through why Point 32 Health is piloting the Galleri test, and just as importantly, how we have been working with GRAIL for the better part of 2 years to develop and then now successfully implement a 2-phase pilot. It looks like I may have a little extra time, so I may add a few comments that weren't planned. We'll just play it by ear. As mentioned by Anwel, Point 32 Health is the first commercial health plan in the US to pilot the Galleri test, and we're certainly proud of that. If you don't recognize the name Point 32 Health, you will recognize the 2 health plans that merged to form our organization, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan. And these are both leading health plans in the New England market. We serve over 2 million members, and our membership is across all lines of business, from commercial to MedAdvantage to Medicaid. Within Point 32 Health, we have a clinical innovation team, and we are really seeking to proactively address healthcare challenges and emerging trends that impact our population. We also are very proud of efforts to ensure equitable access to high quality, innovative solutions. And we're really doing all of this in order to develop that real world evidence that you hear payers want, we do, to help inform whether and how to bring new solutions into the broader organization. Oh, I just have a technical issue. So why is Point 32 Health interested in MCED testing? One of our pillars here at Point 32 Health is to challenge the status quo. And as you've already heard, the status quo in cancer is that it is often diagnosed too late, or at a stage at which treatment is less likely to be curative. And also that there are screens for just a handful of cancers. So that's the status quo. We are very interested in new and emerging technologies and solutions. And so this is a nice fit with the new application of next-gen sequencing or next-gen technology to a problem that's existed for a long time. And the bottom line is this has the potential to enable earlier cancer detection before symptoms develop and at a point at which treatment may be more effective. And so that's really why we're doing this. Our goals are to assess the impact of MCED testing in that real world health plan setting. You know, we're looking to understand the member experience, the provider experience. How does the test perform in our population? as well as some internal questions around operational and downstream implications of this type of cancer screening. So I'm going to move to the next slide and talk about what we've accomplished so far. So our pilot program is in 2 phases, and phase 1, which was our colleague pilot, we refer to ourselves, our employees, as our colleagues, is complete. And what we did was we provided the Galleri test at no cost to our colleagues who met eligibility criteria, which are similar to what NWEL has outlined. And we had really 2 goals. One, we want to offer innovative benefits to our colleagues, and this is innovative. And the other was we wanted to start by offering MCED testing in an environment where we could learn quickly, adapt quickly, and also take those learnings and apply them to phase 2, which is really externally facing to our members. We had well over 400 of our colleagues participate, and just at a high level, the learnings were there is strong interest. We sort of all talked about, did you get your test, right? Did you get your results? There was a lot of enthusiasm and energy around this. There was high satisfaction. And there were some learnings, mainly around some operational processes around the ordering process. And those are important because when you move into offering it to your members, you want that seamless experience. And so I think this was a great way for us to start. Phase 2 is really multiple pilots within a pilot because we have plans to offer the Galleri test to different member populations in different healthcare settings. The first of these is a pilot in a subset of our HMO members in the state of Maine. And we're offering it in 2 different ways. One, through a telehealth option, and then the member would go to a Grail partner lab for the test. And the other is through a blood draw event. We just had one, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and we have another planned. And this is where the members can sign up in advance, and they present to, this happened to be one of those kind of, convenient walk-in doctor centers. And there's an on-site independent provider who confirms their eligibility, and then the blood draw is provided on-site as well. Combined between the telehealth and the on-site event, and this is only in a few short months, really, we've had over 300 members request testing. Members have been very interested, and I'd even say, I'd use the word grateful, very grateful for this. In particular, the blood draw event seemed to be a really great option for a number of members, perhaps because it was on the weekend, perhaps because they knew they could get everything done in one place. And we found that to be really quite successful, and we have plans to do another one this spring. One of the things I want to point out here, which has been a learning that hasn't come from our members or providers, and it's not really operational per se, is that there really has to be a joint commitment between the health plan and the manufacturer, the lab, to the member experience. And we have all done our share of being flexible, creative, bending over backwards to make sure that the member experience has been seamless. And I think that that's been critical to our success. Oh, hold on. And then I mentioned that phase 2 is sort of several pilots within a pilot. We are collaboratively working with Grail to finalize a collaboration with a large health system in our market. Stay tuned there. And that will be a different model where the member presents to the health system for the testing. And I think there'll be a lot of great learnings in that environment as well. And then lastly, just kind of taking a step back, I mentioned there were some key questions that we had. Member provider experience, how does the test perform in our population? Grail has been tracking patient member satisfaction for both phase 1 and phase 2, and those scores have been high and favorable, and that's helpful to us. And they're also keeping track of written comments that we can kind of compile and take a look at. Again, focusing on that member experience and the provider experience as well. And for phase 2, not for phase 1, there are additional outcomes of interest related to how the test is actually performing that are being tracked. It looks like we have a lot of time for questions. Those are most of my comments, so I will turn it back over to Joe. I think he has a few last comments.
Thank you so much, Dawn. So for folks that are interested, happy to follow up after the webinar about how the Galleri test could fit into your broader screening, social determinants of health, and access improvement programs generally. We are keen to engage with additional innovative payers on how our multi-cancer early detection test can serve elevated risk populations. We're working with a number of folks on rural outreach programs, again, because we simply rely on a blood draw. The Galleri test truly can meet your members where they are. As well, we have a number of health equity and disparity reduction initiatives underway. Have a great team in Chuck, Anwell, and Craig ready to work with all of you on a project and engagement of your design and choosing. So with that, why don't we go to the Q&A and we can work through some of those questions in the time that we have remaining.
Great. This is Giles Bruce again with Becker's. I just want to thank Dawn, Joe, Whitney, and Anwell for a great, very insightful presentation today. I know our attendees appreciated it. So we'll now begin today's Q&A session. You can submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A chat box on your webinar console. Let's go ahead and get started with the first question. Okay, so we have one here from, let's see, oh, this one is for Dawn. What is the lesson learned from the early payer partnerships thus far?
That's a great question. I think the lessons learned from my perspective is that there's a need internally at the health plan to lean into a lot of different expertise. So it's not just that the clinical innovation team is doing everything. We really touch so many parts of the organization, from educating other parts of our organization to securing buy-in to securing approval. And so I think just knowing that it's a multifaceted effort internally and then externally in thinking about working with a lab partner, a manufacturer, is a lab manufacturer partner that brings all of the right skill sets to the table and kind of matches your skill sets or your functions, really works well. And that, again, I can't emphasize enough, the focus on the member experience is so important. And then I would say we've been almost surprised by the interest. It's not that we didn't think there would be interest. However, some members have personally thanked members of the GRAIL team or members of the team at the blood draw event. We're incredibly grateful. So I do wonder if we're tapping into concerns among our membership that we hadn't fully appreciated. So I'd say that the learnings kind of fit into those three buckets: the internal, working with the partner, and then what it is that members might be thinking.
Okay, great. And we have another question here from Patrick. From a purely technological point of view, what causes false positives?
Yeah, I'll take that. That's a great question. There's really two components to the test once it gets into the classifier's hand. Number one, what's the level of cell-free DNA that's present? And so clearly we see positive detectable cell-free DNA in false positives. That's the first. So the second is that we, in fact, need to see a pattern of methylation, because this is a methylation-based assay, that fits our classifier in terms of likeness. So in terms of the, why do we have false positives? Okay, so number one is that, it's a true false positive. The signal's there. We quantify DNA, but there's no cancer present. The second is, of course, whether or not the cancer is in the site and the location that we call the cancer signal in. We're accurate about 9 out of 10 times, but 1 out of 10 times, the cancer is present, but it's in a side of the body that's different than we called. And so that's the importance of being a good clinician, asking additional questions, making sure people are up to date with their USPSTF screenings, nothing in the family history. And then finally, there's a very small possibility that a positive could represent a cancer that's clinically undetectable, and thus the need for close follow-up for people who are positive with no cancer signals detected at the time of the targeted workup.
Great. And I have another question here from Margaret. Will this test be paid for by Medicare?
Here, I'll answer that question. Right now, the test is not covered by Medicare. We are working hard and diligently to ensure that the test will be paid for by Medicare and hopefully other commercial payers in the near future. But what I was mentioning earlier was plans offering the Galleri test. Medicare Advantage plans could potentially offer the test as a supplemental benefit.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Question here for Dawn. If you had to identify the most important reason you decided to pilot the Galleri test, what was it?
I think the most important reason that we have clinical innovation at Point 32 Health is so we can test out new solutions, technologies, offerings, programs before they are so widespread that we're kind of in a position to not know if it's appropriate for our population. And we've been following this type of testing for a while and felt that the time was right to pilot this to see how does this work in our population? Are we ready to bring this into our organization as a whole? And if so, how?
Excellent. Next question here. Pilots were mentioned earlier. What is the minimum size for an elevated risk population?
Well, I'll take this. I just was finished talking with one of my groups who are doing a study in germline patients. It'll all depend on what the study design is. If it's a 2-armed trial, it'll probably take at least 1,000 people to look at standard of care versus standard of care plus Galleri testing. If we do a in the wild just return of results on people with germline abnormalities, could potentially take less than that just to sort of identify whether the use is appropriate and then we're getting increased results. So we think probably about 1,000 people in a risk group like germline testing. So I'm going to throw that out there with not being a mathematician and statistician, and we can always follow back up on that with additional information if you're interested.
Okay, great. And question here from Jolie. Can this test be used post-treatment for breast cancer as part of long-term surveillance?
Yes, I'll take that as well. So clinically, this is, first of all, it's not a minimal residual disease test. It's not to be used post-treatment, post-surgery to determine if the surgery's been successful. We feel that it's most appropriate to reinitiate for long-term surveillance 3 years after successful completion of cancer treatment. And that does not include hormonal therapy for breast cancers. There are certainly people who have, decided to utilize it earlier, but our firm recommendation is 3 years post successful treatment of therapy and not to have that reduced by hormonal therapy for breast cancers.
Excellent. And another question here from Melinda. There was a mention of primary care providers as ordering providers. How are they trained to answer the myriad questions this test can raise, both pre and post tests, as well as ensuring eligibility, et cetera? This could be a daunting task for primary care providers.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great call out. And I think it's a little bit the same as many of the other complex molecular diagnostic tests that we utilize. There's a little bit of what I call a black box phenomenon, which understanding how this cell-free DNA works and the utilization is somewhat complex. But understanding that a person with a positive signal needs to undergo a diagnostic workup, and the fact that our reporting is somewhat binary in nature is going to be helpful to the primary care physician. I think the second part is when that person has a positive, we provide very intense wraparound support with our team of medical science liaisons and access to medical directors, as well as third parties through City of Hope Access Hope Group. So because of the unlikely nature that a positive comes up, about 1 in 100, we absolutely want to support those primary care physicians in that diagnostic journey. And we think it will include specialists, imaging, and a whole team of folks to really do that diagnostic workup in an accurate and timely fashion. So it's a team effort for sure.
Okay, and it looks like we have a follow-up here from Margaret on the insurance question. If not covered by insurance, what is the cost to the consumer who would like to take the test, such as through a lab like Quest Diagnostics?
Sure, this is Joe. I can field that. We do have a national partnership with Quest. So at any of the 6,500 Quest locations, you can actually have your blood drawn for the Galleri test. We are on the market as a laboratory developed test, however, so all of the samples do need to be run at one of two of our labs, one in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, the other in Menlo Park. You can request the test directly from GRAIL via our website through our telemedicine provider channel, and the retail price of the test is $949 through that channel.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And a question here about how often the test should be done here from Nancy. Yeah, she's asking how often should it be done, annually, every couple of years, et cetera?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. And we've modeled it both ways, but what we've found is that the largest number of cancers detected, as well as the earliest in the interception stage, occurs with an annual cadence. And if you think about the cancers that we're best at detecting, those that are the most aggressive cancers that shed more DNA, those cancers tend to have extremely short dwell time. So the time they move from a stage 1 to a more advanced stage cancer. And so this is not a standalone test for risk down the road. It's really a snapshot of that moment. And so we see this as an annual test for those at elevated risk. There may be individuals who may need it more frequently, such as high penetrance level genomic BRCA mutations. There may be folks who elect to use it at a lower cadence who may be low risk. But we think of this as an annual cadence because of the importance of detecting aggressive cancers.
Great. We have a question here from Connie. Can you describe more about how the conversation goes with an individual who has no symptoms but who tests positive for a type of cancer? What support is there for potential increased costs of surveillance, workup, and additional testing?
All right. Well, I'll try to catch all those within I think the talk line is that people develop cancer, and as you get older, you have a certain annual rate of cancer, and over your lifetime, your risk is somewhere between 30 and 40%. Right now, we only screen for 30% of cancers, and thus we're only impacting cancer mortality at a small level. So this test can detect cancers before people develop symptoms, and if you're positive, you have to undergo a diagnostic evaluation and workup. But the idea is that we can identify cancers at earlier stages prior to their clinical presentation. The most common place in America where cancers are diagnosed, based on a heat map study that we did, were in emergency rooms. And so we're sort of in a you break, I fix cancer world right now for 70% of cancers. This allows us to apply the life-saving impact of multi-cancer to all cancers, or essentially all cancers. So the other two parts of the question, if you want to repeat those for me.
Sure. So let me pull that question back up here. Okay, exit out. So what support is there for potential increased costs of surveillance, workup, and additional testing?
Yeah. Well, we think that every person with a positive Gallery test is an important patient, and they will need to be undergoing not only a workup directed by the cancer signal origin, but also clinicians need to, take a step back and look at their overall cancer risk, other symptoms, family histories, other issues that may require expanded workups at that time. And then if a patient has a negative directed workup, we're offering a free repeat Gallery test within 3 to 6 months to better understand the kinetics of that signal. We don't have data that we can share about that at this time, but it gives us another data point in evaluating that patient. But I suspect that we'll be following people closely who have a positive Gallery test in the clinical setting. And I think the second piece is that diagnostic workup, in our experience so far, has been covered by insurance companies. We follow that metric very closely. And with appropriate counseling of insurers, we've been able to get those expanded workups covered essentially 100% of the time. And they're only coming up about 1% of the time from a payer standpoint.
Okay, Dawn, would you like to address that question as well?
Sure. Just to kind of echo what was just said, a workup for somebody who's suspected of having cancer would be similar to any other workup for someone suspected of having cancer in terms of, co-pays, cost shares, deductibles would apply. Whatever that benefit plan was would apply.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And a question here from Patrick. Having done work in disease management, what is the value proposition here? Say if cancer is caught early, then what is the increase in recoveries or remission years, or what is the cost reduction over the test percentage to the cost of cancer care?
I'll try to take a stab at that question. If we look at it on an individual basis, for that one patient, their family, their employers, their friends, it's very impactful that, hey, they were asymptomatic, they're utilizing a screening test where they feel fine, and they find out that they have a cancer, and hopefully, it's found earlier, and it can be cured, right? We mentioned that 89% survival, 5-year survival rate. So it may be hard to put a cost on that for that individual. But when we look at it from a population scale, it's really about the expectations. We know that 99 or 98.5% of individuals are going to get a negative test result. And I think you have to assign a value to that to understand, well, what does it mean for the individual that is doing everything right? They're following, they're eating healthy, they're exercising, and they get a negative test result and they feel good about their future and it reinforces their positive behaviors. Then you have some individuals who maybe they hit the age of 50 and their employer offers the Gallery test, and maybe they're overweight, maybe they're still smoking or they're drinking excessively. And the Gallery test is a wake-up call, like, hey, I need to look at my health differently, and they may change their behavior. These are things that we don't know, but when we look at it from a population standpoint, I think it's really understanding the expectations of the payer. And one of the things we have done with Point 32 Health is we modeled out the population, and we tried to say, we think the test is going to perform exactly as it has performed in our clinical studies and trials. And that's what we're shooting for. And so we can predict the number of positive signals that we think we will find based on the number of members that are utilizing the Gallery test. And then we work backwards from there and say, what's the value of the test? Hopefully that's a long-winded answer that is sufficient.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that answer. And a question up next from Pete. Might you see the test being used with ACOs where they seek to close gaps in care?
Yep, this is Joe. Great question, Pete. can absolutely confirm value for ACOs and others taking, fully capitated total cost of care risk. Certainly would be benefits relative to RAF and HCC coding as well. So would see a great fit in those kinds of organizations. Thanks.
Okay, let's see. In question here, could the Galleri test be used to address social determinants of health?
Yes, well, I'm happy to take that. So I'm a gastroenterologist in Kentucky that has the worst cancer incidence rate in the nation. And this test has a great capacity to close gaps in care. It may feel it's doing the opposite at this time because it's a cash pay price, except for some great folks like Point 32. But people who have social determinants of health issues have issues with access to the healthcare system at all. This is going to lower that barrier for screening for those people who perhaps aren't participating in USPSTF screenings for whatever reason. This test will serve as a backstop for those people who aren't, taking 4 days off a year to do stool testing and mammography and cervical and pap smears. So, as the other thing I think is that as time goes on, the major drivers of multi-cancer early detection platforms are sequencing capability as well as computing capability. And those are all factors that I think are going to become more accessible to people. So I think being able to make this broadly accessible really fits in the DNA of our team at GRAIL. And we don't see this as a test for people who can afford it. That's why we're working so hard at the federal level to get legislation passed that really allows Medicare to do a national coverage determination, which will then open the floodgates to be able to allow people to access this testing across the entire spectrum, including those with social determinant of health issues. Great question.
Yeah, and great answer. And one more question here from Patrick. What recommendations do you have for an MCED board that would discuss patients with positive signals?
Yep, I'll take that. So we call it a multi-cancer early detection board. We're working on having an internal program in the GRAIL world. What we've already seen are health systems that have picked this up and are implementing it broadly, have already developed a centralized hub to address just those questions. And again, most of the difficult ones are going to be positive signal, negative workup. And so we are fully supporting that and developing a program internally in GRAIL where people can come to us with those questions. And then we're very happy to sit in with groups, institution, or healthcare systems who are interested in setting up their own molecular type tumor board. But in this case, instead of figuring out how to treat advanced cancers with precision oncology solutions, it's how to diagnose those cancers earlier to where they can be more likely cured. So that's a great question. And I think that'll become a real tool because we know that people use molecular diagnostic testing like tumor boards when they have someone there to back them up. And I think that's going to be essential to expand that primary care utilization.
Okay, it looks like we're almost out of time. So we have time for one more question here from Linda. Recently, there were recommendations to only monitor certain diagnosed prostate cancers. Can this test help with the monitoring of these patients?
Yeah, well, this is, again, not a minimal residual disease test. And the way it's designed and engineered is to have broad, pickup of a common cancer signal. Prostate cancers, for the most part, are indolent and low shedding tumors, so we don't pick that up. So this is not indicated for follow-up and surveillance of known prostate cancers.
Great. And with that, we're going to wrap up. So that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Dawn, Whitney, Joe, and Anwell for an excellent presentation, and GRAIL for sponsoring today's webinar. I want to also thank the audience for all their participation as well. To learn more about the content presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console and fill out the post-webinar survey. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.